a genuine American hero, and he reserves our respect and admiration for that. But John McCain has decided to run for George Bush's third term, and we cannot have George Bush and his ideas still in the White House after this next election. We can't afford Katrina incompetence. We can't afford warrantless wiretaps. We can't afford tax policies that are skewed toward the wealthiest Americans while ordinary Americans are struggling. You know, John McCain has said that he is willing to stay in Iraq for as long as it takes. He says we might have a presence there for 100 years. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think that's a way to make America safe. I don't think having our troops on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 rotations is a way to make America safe. I don't think that spending another $1 trillion on an occupation in the middle of the Middle East is somehow going to make us safe. I think it's going to be a recruitment tool for terrorists. I think it will cause more problems for us over the long term. That's why I opposed this war in 2002. That's why I will bring this war to an end in 2009. There's going to be a real difference in November, and Democrats will be unified. John McCain was quoted the other day as saying he had looked over George Bush's economic policies, and he thought that we had made great progress. I don't know who he was talking to. I know he wasn't talking to the hundreds of thousands of people who have already lost their jobs since the beginning of this year. I know he wasn't talking to union workers like UFCW and SEIU and Unite Here, who have seen their jobs being shipped overseas, and they've lost not just their jobs but their benefits, their health care, their pensions, their way of life. He's not talking to them. He's not talking to the millions of people who are at risk of, ask me, Oregon. He's not talking to the millions of people who are at risk of losing their homes because of unscrupulous mortgage lenders. He's not talking to the millions of young people who are trying to figure out how they're going to finance a college education. You don't think that we've made great progress over the last 7.5 years. I don't think we've made great progress over the last 7.5 years, and that's why we can't afford 4 more years of George W. Bush's ideas in the White House, whether it's John McCain or anybody else. We've got to be united in November, and I'm confident we will be. But if we're honest with ourselves, I love you back. But, Portland, if we are honest with ourselves, then we'll acknowledge that the problems we face are not just the problem of one man or one party. Because many of the challenges we face, we've been talking about for decades. We've been talking about health care reform for decades now, through Democratic and Republican administrations, and yet year after year, nothing changes. Why is that? Because the drug and the insurance companies spent $1 billion over the last 10 years preventing reform through lobbying and through campaign contributions. So if we're going to bring about universal health care that both myself and Senator Clinton have talked about, we've got to change how business is done in Washington. Otherwise, you're going to keep on tinkering around the edges, but ordinary families are still going to struggle. The same is true on energy. Look at this beautiful day here in Oregon. We've been hearing for years that unless we reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, unless we control the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that we are threatening this fragile planet of ours. We want to pass this on to our children. I want my daughters that you just saw to be able to bring their children and look at this gorgeous scene. I want them to be able to enjoy Oregon the same way that all of you enjoyed Oregon, but we're not going to be able to do it if we've got the oil companies setting the agenda for energy policy. I mean, we've been talking about energy since 1970s. And yet the only thing that's changed is we actually import more oil from foreign countries, many of them hostile. ExxonMobil made $11 billion 2 consecutive quarters, and you're paying $3.75 at the pump. And when George Bush decided to formulate energy policy, he assigned it to Dick Cheney, and Cheney met with the environmental groups once, he met with the renewable energy groups once, he met with the oil and gas companies 40 times. So is it any wonder then that the laws coming out of Washington are very good for ExxonMobil, they're not so good for you? We cannot change our energy policy unless we change how business is done in Washington. And that has been at the heart of this campaign. At the beginning of this campaign, we said a conventional textbook Washington campaign just won't do. Reading polls because we're worried about what the Republicans say about us, that just won't do. Trying to calibrate and calculate every single step that you take just won't do. The Democratic Party, the party of Jefferson and Jackson, the party of Roosevelt and Kennedy, has always been at its best when we led not with calculation but with conviction, not with polls but with principles. When we summoned the entire nation to a common purpose, a higher purpose. That is the kind of party America needs us to be right now. A party that doesn't just focus on how to win, but why we should. That's why I'm running for President of the United States. That's why you are here today, to change politics fundamentally so we can start solving problems for future generations. Now, there are 2 specific things that we're going to have to do. Number 1, we've got to drive out the special interests that are controlling Washington. You know, John McCain now has had to get rid of 5 of his top advisors because it turns out they're all lobbying, many of them for foreign governments. That's because he practices the same kind of politics that we've grown accustomed to in Washington. When I decided to run this campaign, the first thing we said was, we're not going to take money from PACs, we're not going to take money from federal registered lobbyists, because we want to be accountable to the American people. And that's why you can have some confidence. We can go ahead and tell the lobbyists in Washington their days of setting the agenda are over. They have not funded my campaign, they will not run our White House, and they will not drown out the voices of the American people when I'm President of the United States of America. That's step number 1, reclaiming the government for the people. Making sure that big moneyed interests aren't running a government, making sure that the government is transparent, making sure that we're opening it up so that you guys can see what's going on, having all our meetings that are now indoors and behind closed doors with all the lobbyists in their Gucci shoes. We're going to make sure that they're happening on C-SPAN so that you can see what's going on.